Okay, gonna wait a minute or so for people to join, but we're gonna get started here very shortly. We're live now.
Nice.
Okay, let's see. Oh, let me refresh my phone because I got internet issues on my phone as typical.
You can hear me well, right?
Yeah, pretty sure, and pretty sure everybody could hear you too. Too. If you guys could hear both of us, please let us know in the chat, because just to save my sanity. Okay, should work. All right, I think we're good. Okay. Good afternoon to you all. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our live tropical weather outlook for you. We're going to be doing these live tropical weather outlooks every Saturday around this time throughout the entirety of the hurricane season. So this is going to be week one of us doing these live tropical weather outlooks, as well as the daily tropical weather videos that we're going to be doing as well throughout the hurricane season. So, week one, what is there to talk about? Not much, but we might have an area of development to watch, or we might, in general, have things to watch in the tropics as we get towards the end of the month, especially as we get towards the start of hurricane season in the Atlantic. We're going to talk about why. We're going to look at the models. We're going to look at climatology. And we're going to be looking at, in general, how things are shaping up in the basin and across the tropics for the next several weeks. And since this is a live stream, I have a guest with me, my good old friend, Danny Alvarez. Hello, Danny.
How you doing, man? I'm Weather Hub TV, as y'all may know. It's good to have you on this live stream with Danilo. Let's hope this is a good live stream, y'all.
Yeah. All right. So let's get started, as we typically do with every video, taking a look at the National Hurricane Center homepage. And obviously, since it's mid-May, nothing is expected right now over the next 7 days in the Atlantic and in the Pacific as well, even though we started hurricane season there yesterday. Kind of already hard to believe that we are into the Pacific hurricane season already. Nothing is expected over the next 7 days. So things are nice and quiet right now in the tropics, and hopefully it stays that way for a while, but obviously it is not. Moving on to what is happening right now, sea surface temperature anomaly-wise in the Atlantic. Let's really quickly refresh it to see if we got yesterday's map. Yes, we do. May 15th. First day of the hurricane season, and by the way, this map is a day behind, but that's usually how the NOAA Coral Reef Watch does things. They usually only update for 1 day behind, but still, we get updates every single day, so I guess, evens the playing field. And sea surface temperature anomaly-wise in the Atlantic right now, things are warm, especially in the Caribbean and throughout the Gulf of Mexico, and especially a patch here off of the southeastern Florida coast and in the Bahamas, where we have an anomaly as high as 2 degrees Celsius above normal. But in general, throughout the deep tropics of the Atlantic, things are near normal, so like right around where they should be, to slightly above normal. Versus the Pacific, on the other hand, boy, are things very, very warm right now. We have, obviously, an El Nino brewing, probably going to be a very, very strong El Nino, as well as a very warm Eastern Pacific, and I talked about that in last week's video, last Saturday, and I mentioned why this will probably fuel in a very active Eastern Pacific hurricane season, and I obviously reflected that idea as well with my Pacific prediction video, which not video, but I released a tweet, I believe yesterday, since yesterday was the start of the Pacific hurricane season. And yeah, I'm expecting a very, very active hurricane season in the Pacific this year, predictably so. And towards the end, I'm going to go over my Pacific predictions if you have not caught them yet. So make sure to stay tuned till the very end of this live stream in order to see that. But in general, we have El Nino brewing in the Pacific. The Atlantic is, near normal to slightly above normal. It doesn't look terrible in the Atlantic right now, but obviously not the most favorable of looks. So in general, that should generally favor things strongly in the Pacific this year. And of course, with the Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomalies, the latest value from the Normal Coral Reef Watch right now, as of today, 1.1 degrees Celsius above normal. Let's see if can I actually update this. No, I cannot yet. Never mind. But 1.1 degrees Celsius above normal is the latest daily value. For the raw sea surface temperature anomaly value for NOAA Coral Reef Watch, but then there's the relative Nino index, which is at 0.7 degrees Celsius above normal. And I always find it interesting, the difference between the raw and the relative Nino index. And I guess that's on purpose, right? Since we're trying to, remove any sort of potential warmth bias that might exist in the anomaly maps now, especially today, because the entire globe is warmer. But, still kind of puts into perspective, the difference in terms of how things are shaping up now. But interestingly enough, in both of the maps now, with the relative Nino 3.4 and the actual raw sea surface temperature map, we are both well above El Nino threshold. I mean, on the raw sea surface temperature anomaly map, we are at 1.1 degrees Celsius, so we're technically already getting into moderate strength versus the relative Nino, where we are still below moderate strength, but we are above the 0.5 degrees Celsius threshold for El Nino. So looks like El Nino is full sail ahead, right?
Yeah. It's gonna be
Pretty-
very strong.
Yeah, pretty much guaranteed that we're going to have it at this point. I mean, there's no, questioning otherwise. I guess maybe there's a question about whether or not it'll be a super strong El Nino, like, a lot of people are saying online, are we going to get 3 degrees Celsius or higher? I don't know what you think about that. I don't know. Maybe we might get close to 3 degrees Celsius on the raw Nino 3.4, but, especially with the relative Nino, us being at least, usually, at least from what I see, the trend is we're usually half a degree Celsius lower on the relative Nino compared to the traditional value. So maybe if we expect a 3 degrees Celsius El Nino in terms of the raw sea surface temperatures, the actual event is only going to peak at 2.5. I mean, that's still strong, but, I guess it does still matter, especially when a lot of people are talking about a 3 degrees Celsius El Nino, like I see a lot of people talking about online. Yeah. And you know how I feel about that.
Right.
But I guess certainly when you look at the SOI, El Nino is definitely coming. And as I always mention, the SOI is a very important metric, because the SOI kind of gives us an idea as to how the atmosphere is responding right now. And I mean, as if you've been following me for the last several years, you would always know that I would say that having an SOI above +7 generally indicates that we are in La Nina territory, because that's in general um, what we've been dealing with over the last several years is La Nina. Um, but for now, since we are now in El Nino, the threshold for El Nino in the SOI is typically -7, and the 30-day average right now is at that. We are currently at -7.4. But what's especially very interesting, and it definitely shows that we are pretty decently headed towards El Nino strength atmospherically, is the 90-day average now is in the negatives. And for the longest time, it was in the positives, but now the 90-day average is in the negatives. And I guess maybe that matters more since El Nino is kind of measured on a long-term period. I mean, officially, NOAA measures El Nino on tri-monthly periods, so I guess if we were to take an average over the last 90 days, we are still actually not quite an El Nino threshold yet, honestly, with the SOI, but we're getting there, especially if we look at how things have shaped up over the last 30 days. But, we're in the negatives now, and that definitely shows the atmosphere is transitioning more to El Nino, which is important because El Nino is a major factor, especially when it comes to looking at, overall hurricane activity. So that's the deal with the SOI. How are things looking at right now, though, in terms of how activity is in the tropics right now? Here's a satellite image of the Atlantic, and I mean, I don't really know what else to expect or what else you would expect to see on May 15th, because there's literally nothing out there.
Mhm.
um, I mean, we have some Saharan air, and, I guess that's kind of a way to know that hurricane season really is coming, because we have Saharan air already coming off the coast, or coming off the continent of Africa. I mean, I guess Saharan air is something that happens year round, right? I'm not
Yeah.
sure. It happens year round, but for some reason it peaks in May and June and July, especially. I think the peak is actually July. Um,
Mhm.
but I guess that hurricane season really is about to start, because you're really starting to see a lot of that thick Saharan air begin to move off of Africa, and that's especially a trademark of the early season. Although it typically clears by the time we get to the peak, so don't expect it to last long. Although probably it'll last a little bit more this year, since we're going to deal with El Nino. But we have Saharan air out there, but literally nothing else. I mean, there's wind shear everywhere, and I'm going to show you the wind shear map in just a little bit. But nothing really going on. There's this interesting front here in the western Atlantic, just east of Bermuda, attached to a low that is pretty potent, seemingly, over Newfoundland right now. And then in the Pacific as well, kind of showing you a Atlantic Pacific, in between shot. Let me actually get this centered on the East Pac. And oh great, more great things happening to my computer right now. But um, automated message goes data is running behind. Oh great. But I mean, there's really nothing happening anyways in the Pacific, so it doesn't matter. Um, I'm going to be honest with you. I thought that we would have something occur within the first week of the Pacific hurricane season. Kind of surprised that there's literally nothing right now. I don't know what you think about that.
I am surprised too. I thought by now we would at least be seeing the signals starting to pop up. Honestly, I don't know. In the early May, I honestly thought by May 11th or 12th we would already be seeing some long-term signals at least. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, here we are, May 16th, and it's still early. I mean, the season just started yesterday, but
Yeah.
um, there's still nothing coherent there. There's some things long range that I've seen, but there's nothing consistent yet in the models. Nothing that we could be like, oh, this is for sure happening. Which is a little bit questioning. At least right for me.
Yeah. I don't know. My personal prediction was that we were going to see something like the first week of the Pacific season. Um, but I mean, I guess this doesn't. Not that this really has any bearing though on what is actually going to happen in the Pacific overall, because I'm pretty sure that by the time we get to like next month and definitely July, uh,
Right.
the Pacific is absolutely going to be cranking. Um, and not just the Eastern Pacific, but the entire Pacific probably. So, you know, I guess enjoy the quiet while it lasts, right?
Yeah.
um, but, and you can see that as well in terms of the 850 millibar vorticity. Nothing significant happening in terms of any signals of things trying to develop. And of course, we look at the 850 millibar vorticity map to see areas in the atmosphere in which spin and cyclonic turning is trying to concentrate, and obviously that is one of the biggest signals of where uh, tropical activity might be trying to develop. But luckily, right now, nothing really strong appearing anywhere, neither in the Pacific or in the Atlantic. Obviously, we have a lot of these greens in the MDR. Those are our tropical waves, which are moving off of Africa. And I don't know what you think about this, Danny, but so kind of surprisingly early how many tropical waves we already have out there. Like, I think our first one moved off in like the first 2 or 3 days of the month, and I don't remember that happening for quite a long time. So that's interesting.
Nah, you're right about that. I think the last 2 years, 24 and 25, we didn't start until later. Like I think we were in May 15th and we still didn't have our first wave yet, if I'm not mistaken. And we already had our first wave come off like in the first third of June this year. So it's definitely a different set and tone for the season, in that aspect. There's
Yeah,
definitely a lot of wave activity early on.
yeah, yeah. But obviously, none of the waves are going to develop now. And especially when you look at the wind shear, that's definitely not going to happen because there is a lot of wind shear in the basin right now. I mean, just nothing can develop in this kind of wind shear. We have 40, 50 knot wind shear values very consistently right now throughout the Caribbean, and gets even as high as 80 knots of shear in the Gulf. Wow. Um,
That's really high.
yeah, that's really high. um, but that's kind of crazy to see. There's even 100 knots in the Eastern MDR. That's crazy.
I've never seen that at this time of year. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
That's
no.
crazy.
But I mean, it's El Nino after all. And
Right.
we're definitely going to see this kind of wind shear pattern reoccur throughout the year as we have El Nino, which will be an obvious hindrance. And obviously, El Nino causes higher wind shear values. But even then, we're probably going to go down from 100 knots of shear, which we have right now. Versus, though, on the other hand, the Pacific, also quite a bit of wind shear. Actually, I was about to say that the Pacific probably has a little bit lower shear, but never mind. Quite a bit of wind shear right now in the Pacific too, although it is a little lower, especially once you get closer to Mexico. And as I'll show you with climatology in a little bit, I guess that's typically where we should really expect development this time of year anyways in the Pacific. In fact, let's look at it right now. How about where do we expect development this time of year, mid-May to, May 11th to May 20th? Where do we typically see development in the tropics right now? And usually in the Atlantic, we don't have much. Occasionally, we have development that occurs in the Atlantic in May. And me and Danny were actually talking about it, just before the live stream. We had a pretty nice streak of May activity for a while in the Atlantic, especially, several years ago. It was, I think, probably, from 2015 to 2021. And we would always kind of see May activity occur around this time of year. And I guess that's where a lot of these points are reflective of, because, before this points of origin map that I used to show only was updated to like 2015 for a while, but I guess they updated recently, thank goodness. But generally around mid-May, I really don't know why my security thing is annoying me right now on my computer. But generally in mid-May, we see a lot of development occur in the Caribbean and off the Bahamas. And then, of course, in the East Pac, as I mentioned before, we generally have most activity occur closer towards Mexico and further east, closer towards the Central American, continent, or portion of the continent, because really it's one massive connected continent between North and South. And why does that happen? Well, typically this time of year we have the Central American gyre, and that's what kind of tends to favor things early on in the season. So it makes sense as to why we mainly see activity closer towards Mexico and Central America this time of year. So makes sense as to why we are generally seeing only favorable conditions near that area right now. It's kind of like how, in the Atlantic, we generally watch closer towards the Caribbean and Gulf and maybe off the East Coast for development early on in the season, while the Eastern Atlantic tends to not be as favorable. I guess the same could be said in the Pacific, where we generally watch, the eastern part of the Eastern Pacific closer towards Mexico and Central America, while the rest of the basin, especially as we get into the Central Pacific, is still less favorable right now. And especially really not favorable near Hawaii here, where we have 70 to 80 knots of shear. And there's always a lot of shear near Hawaii, like that general area never is usually favorable. But if you saw my Pacific prediction, I think that will not be the case this year. We're probably going to see things pretty favorable there. But that's probably going to come later on, only in about July or August. So we still have a little bit of time till then. But right now, for mid-May, we generally watch, around the Pacific, near Mexico and in the Caribbean as our main areas of development. And then that generally persists as we get towards the last third of May. Although obviously you can see here, development really begins to pick up in the Pacific as we get further along into the hurricane season. And then we start seeing more points of origin show up in the Atlantic as we get closer towards the start of hurricane season officially for us, or for them if we're talking about the Pacific and Atlantic, through that lens. But for us, I guess, since me and you both, we are in the Atlantic basin, as we get closer towards June 1st, things begin to pick up then. And of course, obviously, activity generally happens closer to Central America, and on the Atlantic side, that's the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and off the southeast coast. But why am I mentioning that? Well, just to give you an idea of areas that we should be watching over the next several weeks, because to me, it looks like things are going to start becoming favorable in this part of the globe near Central America as we head towards the end of the month. And one of the first things as to why I believe that is looking at the velocity potential from the European, and this generally tells us where rising motion or sinking motion in the atmosphere is going to be, and that obviously tells us whether or not the atmosphere is primed for thunderstorm activity, which is obviously what we need in order to get tropical activity. And as you go out into time, you could see that especially as we get towards the middle part here of mid-June, and actually let me really quickly refresh this map because it seems a little off to me. The European charts map, especially with the velocity potential, has been a little off for the last several weeks. I'm not sure why. All right, let's see. Can I update this? No, it's still on this weird version of the map. It's not quite updated. Whatever. But I think you could generally see where I'm getting at here, we have a lot of the green, meaning upward motion, over time is moving more and more into the western part of the world, into the western hemisphere, and we generally see more rising motion, especially set up in the Eastern Pacific and around the Caribbean, and this generally happens around mid to late May, which is the time frame that we are in. So, and another model to look at is the GEFS long range as well, and you can just generally see over time. We have a lot of rising motion right now in the Western Pacific, and that generally slides eastward as the MJO progresses eastward. And eventually, you see we have a lot of rising motion already begin to set up in the Eastern Pacific. And usually MJO, especially this time of year, is very important because most development, really rise on MJO this time of year. Since it's early on in the season and we kind of really become dependent on the MJO right now. So it's very interesting to see that rising motion really begins to set up in our part of the world, as we get into late May and early June. And early June is also, of course, when the hurricane season starts in the Atlantic. So that is definitely very interesting for sure. And let's actually see what the CFS Weekly shows here. I don't typically look at this model often, but you can see we go week 1. I presume this is now till May 23rd. I think that's the time frame I see here, right? So from today till May 23rd, week 1, you can see rising motion is in general in the Pacific, and then it really comes on strong according to the CFS by the time we get to week 2, which is May 23rd to May 30th. And that definitely looks like a pretty solid signal there of the atmosphere becoming more favorable. And then it really lasts, especially as we get into the first week of June. I think that's a prime signal for definitely something we'll have to watch. And again, when is the time frame? End of May, early June, and that is typically around the time when we have our first developments of the season in the East Pacific, and we are starting to get to that magic date, June 1st, the start of the hurricane season. So definitely something that we're going to be watching very closely.
For sure.
And then let's see what happens here as we go out into time, and then we get towards mid-June. MJO kind of settles back into the Pacific, and then the CFS kind of keeps the MJO here throughout the month of June in the Pacific, as of course we have El Nino forcing really set in. I see a lot of people saying that June is when we're really going to start seeing forcing occur in the Pacific, and help strengthen the El Nino. So I guess that's what's being reflected here on the CFS. But especially late May and early June, when we really see this rising motion begin to set up, and definitely the MJO coming strongly here into the Eastern Pacific and Caribbean phases. This will be the time of year, or this will be the time frame that we really need to start watching. And you can already see that really reflected on the models. And I'll show you that with the GFS here from the 6Z run. The 12Z is beginning to load, but it only goes out to hour 210 right now, so I'm going to stay on the 6Z. And I'm going to take this out all the way till the end of the model run. Why? Because I'm trying to show you something here, although I really, if you know me by now, you know that I really do not like looking past 7 days on the models. So here's that. But I think in general, we could kind of use this as a way to see when the atmosphere should potentially start reflecting rising motion setup shop here, because usually, especially this time of year, when the MJO comes into the Pacific and Caribbean Atlantic phase, that helps trigger a Central American gyre, which I'm pretty sure you guys have all heard that term before. And you can already start seeing it here occur on the GFS, especially as we get towards the 15 to 16 day time frame, which on the GFS is roughly May 30th to June 1st, so literally the last few days of May into the first day of June, which is the start of hurricane season. And you can see here vorticity kind of beginning to build up over Central America. You could also see in general, we'll just look at the wind bars here. We generally start seeing a large area of cyclonic turning begin to develop over the Central American continent, and then sometimes we see that break off into different vorticity areas, which then lead to development that occurs either in the Pacific, or if it's far north enough, it happens in the Atlantic. But in general, you are already starting to see the signs of a Central American gyre begin to develop here in the model, and of course, that's because of the signal, or definitely reflective of the signal of the MJO beginning to come into the Pacific and the Atlantic. So nice how it all aligns up nicely there, and we're definitely going to be watching very closely, because I am pretty sure that something is going to form out of this, especially in the Pacific, since they're supposed to have a very active season this year. I think this is the start of seeing signals for development as we get towards the end of this month and into the beginning of next month, meaning the beginning of hurricane season. And yes, Brandon Dunn in the comments, that's exactly when we are watching the Central American gyre. That is correct. MJO moving into phase 8 and 1, the Eastern Pacific and the Caribbean. Definitely this time of year triggers the Central American gyre, which is exactly what we're seeing show up in the models right now. So, Danny, take it away with your thoughts.
I definitely feel like when we get to early June that things are gonna look a lot different than they do right now. Right now it's a pretty dead time in the Western Hemisphere, but I feel like once the MJO starts coming in early next month, that things are gonna change really quickly, really quickly.
Yeah.
And with those warm SSTs in the Eastern Pacific, I really feel like it could feel something to form pretty easily, honestly. In 2018, I like to bring this up because in 2018 we didn't have a May storm, but yet we saw how active that season was as a whole. I'm not sure if it will be 2018 levels of crazy this year, because that was, I think, the most active Eastern Pacific season on record.
Yeah.
But it just shows that May really doesn't really mean anything in the Eastern Pacific.
Yeah.
But
And I think in
watch early June for the Atlantic too. By the way, I would.
Yeah, I would too, because we're starting to approach the beginning of hurricane season then. But I do remember 2015 as well. We didn't have a storm develop in the Pacific until around this time period, when things start becoming interesting. May 28th, May 29th, May 30th. And I've, in my experience tracking the Pacific, that's usually when, around that date, that's usually when we typically see the average, first storm form in the Pacific. So, MJO beginning to come into the Pacific and the Atlantic around that time. And you can already see the models begin to reflect some sort of Central American gyre occur around then. I definitely say that last week of May and early June should be the time frame to watch. And I should have brought this map up, but I showed it to you guys yesterday. You guys meaning the viewers on my video yesterday. But the Climate Prediction Center also has a highlighted area for potential development in the Eastern Pacific as well. In fact, let me just CPC tropical weather hazards. Let's really quickly actually try to find it. Here we go. And yeah, the Climate Prediction Center is reflecting basically what we're saying, and that conditions will become more favorable as we get towards the end of the month. And interestingly enough, you could also see that begin to appear on the EPS as well. Um, in fact, let me take it towards the end of the model run here. Nothing really happens in the Atlantic, although, probably give it a few days from, this day here, because the EPS, at least as of the 0Z run, ends on May 31st. So I'm pretty sure beyond that, especially as we get into like the first week of June, would not shock me if something actually begins to try to happen in the Atlantic. But go into the Eastern Pacific, on the other hand, and yeah, that's a pretty decent signal that begins to show up on the EPS ensemble map. And this, again, really kicks up around the last week of June, especially the last 3 or so days of the month. So it really seems to be, I really think it's going to be that last week of May, first week of June time frame when things are really going to start to be, more active here in the Pacific. But interestingly enough, I guess since we are still far out in time, because I gotta be honest, I cannot, always use only the models that show lots of activity. Because on the other hand, and this is something very interesting, and we're definitely going to have to watch this, especially as, AI becomes a lot more of a reliable tool. The Google AI model still does not show anything yet. I don't know if that's going to change. I think it will change. I don't know what you think, Danny.
I feel like it will change too. I'm with you. I feel like maybe the AI model is a little too quiet.
Yeah,
um, it's been accurate the last year or so that since it's becoming more used in the weather aspect of things, but I feel like they may be wrong here. I feel like something will happen in the next 2 weeks. I'll be surprised if it didn't. I'll be
yeah,
surprised.
yeah, I think so. I mean, right now it goes all the way out to hour 312, which I think is probably 14 days out, if I'm not mistaken, right? 14 days,
Yeah.
maybe 13. But it goes out to, what's the last day here? May 29th. And, that is generally the date that we should start, watching to see if the models are showing something developing around that time. But the Google AI is still not yet enthused. So maybe it's right, maybe it'll be wrong, but I think it'll be wrong. And then finally, we have the CFS Weekly here, and I'm going to show you first how things shape up in the Atlantic, and then we're going to go to the Pacific. Although on this kind of snapshot here, you can kind of see both basins, but you could see in general, once again, as we get towards week 2, really start seeing a lot of precipitation show up here throughout the Caribbean as we start getting rising motion to set up as the MJO arrives. And then especially that first week of June, quite a bit of precipitation present, especially over Central America and through the Caribbean as well. And that's a lot of precipitation expected over Cuba, and it'll also spread into Florida and maybe the Southeast as well. That's also something else that happens. Yeah, Brandon Dunn says it's 13 days out, so the Google AI model only goes out 13 days. I mean, I should have done basic math. 29 minus 16 equals 13. So there you go. um, but yeah, a lot of rain expected, and regardless, I will say this: regardless of whether or not we're going to actually get tropical activity, in the Atlantic or in the Pacific, although I think, especially in the Pacific, this is probably a pretty decent signal. Um, Florida, first week of June, as this Central American gyre really sets up and the MJO comes in, no matter what, I think Florida and the Bahamas, and especially the Western Caribbean, should get a lot of precipitation and moisture. So you're definitely going to have your fair share of rain, right?
Yeah, it's gonna be a heavy dump. This month, honestly, for May standards, has been pretty dry, so we need it. We definitely need it
Yeah.
down here. Yeah.
And huge chunks of the Southeast as well are in a drought, are they?
Yeah, yeah. Pretty bad one too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you in Florida? Because Danny lives in Florida, by the way, if you guys don't know.
In the area I live in the Miami area. Like in this area, the drought is not as bad, but I know in Southwest Florida, there's been a lot of like wildfires happening. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
kind of close to my area, there was a wildfire in Broward County a couple of days ago that was really bad.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, the drought here is way worse than it's been in recent years. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's really bad. It's really bad.
And that's generally a product of La Nina too, right? As
Yeah,
especially the
yeah.
southeast, due to the general weather pattern of La Nina, tends to keep things very dry, and over time, especially given how much La Ninas we've been having over the past several years, uh, you know, we've been definitely no wonder why we have a pretty significant drought right now. But hopefully that'll subside, especially as El Nino begins to set in. And given that this year's El Nino is going to be a strong one, hopefully that'll help offset a lot of places that are in drought conditions right now. And I think that'll especially come this winter, and that's obviously a completely separate topic that we'll talk about at a later time. But bottom line, moisture is coming to Florida, especially as we get towards early June, and then it really continues, especially as we get into the second week of June, but also here is on the CFS Weekly, especially spreads into all of the Southeast, especially through the Deep South, and I'm pretty sure they need the rain quite a bit as well. But interestingly enough, and I know me and you, Danny, we like to look at the CFS at weeklies quite a bit. And sometimes we could kind of depict or see, by looking at the weeklies, kind of making out a potential track that whatever moisture or low pressure here, might develop. And you kind of see if, in a way, moisture here obviously streaming from the Caribbean and making its way into the Southeast. And, if you kind of use your common sense, if you will, you can maybe make out that maybe the CFS Weekly is hinting at a potential, tropical cyclone-like track, or a low pressure in the very least coming from the Caribbean into the Gulf.
I see it. There's above average precipitation coming from the Caribbean into the Florida areas, the Eastern Gulf into the Southeast coast, which is typical for this time of year, which is why that maybe there is a chance of a tropical cyclone coming out of this. Um, Even though it is the GFS, I have seen like some signal in the AI GFS of some low pressure system happening around this time into the Eastern Gulf of Mexico. So honestly, there is a chance of something coming out of it. You never know.
Yeah.
We've had it before, and it won't be the last time.
Well,
There'll be many more occurrences of this.
yeah, right. Well, the 12Z AIGFS though doesn't show it, because the 6C did, and that's what he's talking about. Especially if we go out here towards the end of the time frame, the 6C AI GFS, not the regular GFS. This is the AI. You could see, we see some sort of low pressure here develop over Central America, probably a part of the general gyre setup that'll occur. And then we kind of see this very, very broad low pressure that develops in the Eastern Gulf. And, knowing the general weather patterns this time of year, that is definitely a signal that would, pique your eye, especially in terms of tropical development. But either way, it's definitely going to bring a lot of rain to Florida. So I think that is, set in stone, no matter if tropical development happens or not. And then afterwards, Florida should probably dry out as we head towards the middle to the end of the month. But interestingly enough, it stays wet here in the Southwest Caribbean. Not sure if that's, just a kind of a model bias or something like that. Or that's just, not related to tropical activity or the gyre, but especially seems to be, probably when the strongest signal occurs is last week of May, first week of June. Already getting ahead of myself. But in general, yep, I think that is the time frame to watch. Right,
Right.
late May, early June. And let's see what other models. Since we're at this, let's see what other models show activity occurring here. So let's see, Euro. Not much happening on the Euro. I mean, you do generally see a buildup of vorticity still occurring, and I think either way, that's still a sign, in my opinion, of a Central American gyre. So the signal is there, and you can kind of see the kink here that occurs in the isobars, where I guess if you kind of try to draw it, it goes from here and in like that. So there's still a general broad turning that even the Euro operational is showing, and this again happens as we get towards the very end of the month. So I think it's safe to say that late May, early June will be the time frame that we need to watch for potential tropical development, and maybe we will have something immediately to start the hurricane season, will we?
No, yeah, it's gonna start off right in time. You could see it's probably gonna be the case this year.
Yeah. And Brandon Dunn has a question for you, Danny. I followed up with Danny in the past in Miami. Hey, Danny, have you done any updates yet for this year? I miss hearing you from a long. I missed hearing you from you. I missed hearing from you for a long time until now.
To answer your question, Brandon, yes, I will upload this year. I haven't been uploading much recently, the last year or two, but I will be uploading this year. I'll keep my money on that. I definitely will. I think I will. I've been thinking about it around May 30th or 31st. I will do a predictions video for the Atlantic, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
There is videos coming.
Yeah, you heard it here. And if you want to follow Danny, at least on his weather channel, he is at WeatherHub TV on YouTube, and maybe TikTok. I don't know if anybody here really watches TikTok or uses TikTok. I mean, I generally don't, but maybe you'll do it on TikTok too.
It's possible. It's possible.
Yeah. So there you go. But since you're talking about predictions, Danny, perfect segue into the final thing I want to go over in this, little live discussion we have here. Because if you guys remember yesterday, I said that I posted a prediction for the Pacific onto my Twitter, which is still up. I mean, it's going to remain up, but you can see my Twitter here right now, Danilo Evangelista. So if you haven't followed me yet, make sure to follow me on Twitter. And I post quite a bit on Twitter as well, or X, or whatever people are calling it now. We can never get into calling it X. I still call it Twitter, and I think that's how it's going to be like for the rest of my life. I just can't get into calling it X for some reason. But
honestly, calling it X is just so weird, man.
Yeah. No, I much rather prefer Twitter. I think that's a better name. Like X, that's a random letter. Why X, right? But either way, I posted my prediction on Twitter yesterday for the Pacific, and if you're wondering, I am going to do a prediction on June 1st. And if you've been following me for a while, you guys generally know that I do live streams on June 1st. I typically do an evening live stream on June 1st to kind of kick off day one of the hurricane season in the Atlantic. And this year will be no different. And that's, of course, when I'm going to release my Atlantic prediction. So make sure to stay tuned for that on June 1st, and probably when Danny's going to do his prediction as well. But I released my Pacific prediction yesterday, and as obvious and as I've been hinting, we're going to have a very active hurricane season there. I'm saying 18 to 24 named storms, 10 to 14 hurricanes, and 8 to 10 major hurricanes. And then I wrote in the comments here, that because I wasn't able to fit it in graphic-wise, on this little graphic that I made, and yes, I did make this all by myself, so just in case if you're wondering. But I predict 180 to 230 ace points, so very hyperactive indeed for the Pacific. And then landfall-wise, because I do numbers and landfall predictions as well. And, some people have something to say when it comes to, making landfall predictions. I don't really care. I still do it anyways, because I do think in general you could get a general idea of where activity will most likely be in a hurricane season. Obviously, you cannot predict down to the day or down to the exact, city that landfall will occur, especially this far out. But I do believe you could still generally get an idea of an area that is highest risk. And I believe for the Pacific this year, that is generally around the central Mexican coastline. I said the states of Jalisco, Nayarit, and Sinaloa are at risk, as well as the Baja Peninsula. And I'll mention why in just a little bit, but Hawaii as well. A lot of talk about Hawaii over the last several weeks, especially I think the last week, to be honest with you, in terms of what's going to happen this year. And I have a moderate risk for them. I think they have a pretty decent chance of at least getting a threat this year. Maybe more. Maybe it'll be more than just a threat. Maybe we'll actually get a landfall. I don't know, because how Danny, sometimes with Hawaii seems to really have a shield that's stronger than Florida. Talk about the infamous Eastern Florida hurricane shield. Hawaii has a force field.
All the islands have the shield, not just some parts. It's the whole place.
Yeah.
The whole.
Yeah. But I have a heightened risk for Hawaii, and then in general a heightened risk for the central Mexican coastline, especially the Baja Peninsula. And the reason why that is because my top three analogs for the season are 2015, 2018, and 2023. And I'd say 2015 is honestly up there as probably the number one analog of all years. And a common theme that you would notice in a lot of these years is that we would always have a major hurricane landfall occur in and around the central Mexican coast area that I highlighted, especially as we get later in the season. And I think, this is 2023, and, we had, I know there was a hurricane that happened. I'm not sure if it was before or after Otis, but it made landfall in central Mexico. And then, of course, we have Otis, which made landfall in... I already forgot the city that it made landfall in.
Acapulco.
Acapulco, there we go. And then there's that, and then before then we have I think this is 2015. We had Hurricane Patricia, which happened in late October, and that made landfall in central Mexico, right around Jalisco, and then we had quite a bit of Central Pacific activity that year. Although all of it missed Hawaii, and then we also had, where's 2018? I think this is 2018. Quite a bit of activity near Hawaii. We had Hurricane Lane that year, if you remember that, and that was a pretty decent threat, although it didn't materialize as typical for Hawaii. But we did have the threat there, and I do think we will have a threat to Hawaii this year in the very least, as well as quite a bit of Central Pacific activity, and of course, yet another strong landfall that happened near the Baja. So I'm thinking we're going to have a pretty powerful landfall in Mexico, probably mid to late month, or mid to late, probably like September or October, like late season in the Pacific. That's probably going to happen. And then a lot of Central Pacific activity, and in total, that obviously leads me to have a very active forecast for this year, 18 to 24 storms, and as much as 10 major hurricanes, which may seem crazy, or it may seem crazy, but believe it or not, in the Pacific, it's possible. And I believe in all of the years that I actually, have as my top analogs, 23, 2015, and 2018, all three of those seasons ended up having activity or ended up having 8 major hurricanes or higher, and I think 2015 actually ended up having a record number of major hurricanes in the Pacific. So there's that. Is that going to happen this year? I'm not sure, and not going to bet on it. I typically don't bet on extremes usually, but it's possible. So we'll see what happens. So what are your thoughts about that, Danny?
I have very similar thoughts. My numbers are 20 storms, 12 hurricanes, 8 major hurricanes with an ace of 210. So
Yeah,
basically around your range. um,
right.
but yeah, I'm pretty concerned for the Baja Peninsula this year because of how warm the SSTs are too. And since we're in El Nino, it adds extra levels of concern. There's gonna probably be if there is something that tracks up there, it might be stronger than it usually would be because of how warm the SSTs are compared to average.
Yeah.
And Jalisco, the area where Patricia hit, I'm kind of concerned for that area too.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
and Hawaii, I feel like this year might be the highest that they've had since at least 2018, where they had a narrow miss with Lane, but it still brought some impacts over there. I don't really know about an actual landfall, but I feel like Hawaii should definitely watch this year because SSTs over there are really warm compared to usual too in Hawaii. So in the Central Pacific. So I wouldn't be shocked if something that gets really close at the very, very minimum.
Right. And yeah, just to show you what Danny is talking about, very warm sea surface temperature anomalies, especially near the Baja Peninsula and near the southern tip of the Baja Peninsula and kind of around the central and Mexican coastline. Some of these anomalies are getting as warm as two. Is that two? Yeah, that's roughly 2 to some places even 3 degrees Celsius above normal. So quite wild there, and I've honestly never really seen the Eastern Pacific. It's definitely been a while since I've seen the Eastern Pacific this warm, and just combined with the fact that we have El Nino brewing. I mean, again, what's the latest value from the daily sea surface temperature anomaly map? Still waiting for this to load because it's only on May 13th, but whatever. The latest daily value is 1.1 degrees Celsius above normal. So we're already like pretty much at um, you know moderate strength in terms of the daily values. Although it'll probably take a little bit of time for that to be reflected, but um, this look is probably about as classic as it gets for very active Eastern Pacific hurricane season. So uh, I absolutely think that the threat is there for an active season, but especially, given very strong El Nino and this kind of look, Hawaii, I agree, is definitely going to be very much at risk for potentially something, pretty significant too. And Brandon Dunn mentioned California. California needs to be on high alert. Well, guess what? I included Southern California up until about Los Angeles in my risk area as well. I put them at a low risk, obviously, because, California almost never gets anything, but,
Right.
um, it is a risk nonetheless. And, 2023, one of my analog years after all, um, we did have, you remember Hurricane Hillary?
Yeah, the height that got even.
Oh, yeah. Even as a weak tropical storm, I remember that got a lot of hype. And
Right.
because it targeted California, so I'd imagine there's going to be a lot of chatter, especially if we have a California threat this year, which is entirely possible, given, uh, just really quickly going back to this map here, just how warm the sea surface temperature anomalies are right now. And I'd venture to say that this is more than likely probably going to last, especially as we get into June and July, and probably get warmer as this El Nino really begins to churn um, in the equatorial Pacific. And I guess we're going to have a Super Nino this year. I mean, I don't know. What do you think in terms of how strong this El Nino is going to get?
If you want to give me if I'm gonna give a precise range, I say between 1.8 to 2.4 range. I don't really believe in the fact until I see it. If we get to the extremes that some people are saying online of like 2.5 to 3 above average, like I don't see
Yeah,
that happening yet. But it looks pretty certain that we're at least gonna get a strong El Nino, like 1.8 at least, no matter
right.
what. It looks like it. It looks like it.
Yeah, I mean the models too. I guess the especially the reason why the hype is really strong for that is because just the models are very aggressive on even the Euro and the CFS have a 3 Celsius El Nino, and actually why not? Let's take a look at it. Here's the CFS monthly and the sea surface temperature anomalies, and yeah, this El Nino definitely gets very powerful by the time we get to, especially peak time, which for it will probably be around November or December. And I think the CFS is forecasting up to what 3 degrees Celsius in terms of its strength. Um, so I guess everybody is going crazy over that. Now, obviously, the models sometimes do have a tendency of especially really overhyping the strength of El Nino. So you got to take that into account. But strong El Nino is going to happen nonetheless. And I mean, when you especially have a look like we have right now with a very strong El Nino and a very, very warm, tropical Eastern Pacific, I think it is absolutely going to help fuel a very, very active Eastern Pacific hurricane season, which we are probably going to start seeing pan out in just a matter of uh, 1 or 2 weeks from now, whenever we get our first development to occur, which obviously, as we gone over in this discussion, it's probably going to happen towards the end of the month, if not at most, I'd say the start of early next month. So there's that. So any other thoughts you have before we wrap up here?
Um, all I will say is that I feel like impacts in the Eastern Pacific definitely will be higher than they've been in recent years. In 23, they were pretty solid, but like,
Yeah,
I mean, usually the East Pac, we don't think of it as a basin that has a lot of landfalls
right.
or like a lot of impact threats, but this year might be the one year that it might be different. That's what I will say. It'll be
Yeah,
different.
I agree. And before we wrap up, if any of you guys in the chat, if any of you viewers have any questions for us, make sure to send them in the comments now before we wrap up. And Brandon Dunn said another Patricia maybe this year. I don't know. Patricia is a very extreme hurricane, although, again, just given how warm of a setup we have this year, I mean, just look at these sea surface temperature anomalies. Widespread twos, even some threes, especially closer to the Mexican coastline. And, that time of year, late October, especially the time of year that Patricia
Mm.
happened, and screw this security thing on my computer. Why the hell is it so annoying? But especially the time of year Patricia happened, it happened and developed very close to Mexico, and that's where the warmest waters are this year. So it's going to be a very interesting thing to see pan out. Maybe it's possible. Maybe it's possible. And then let's see. Somebody posted their prediction in the chat. Atlantic 11-5-2, Pacific 19-23, 10-12, 5-7, and Pacific, Western Pacific, very active season. 29-36, 13-18, and 9-11, and I'm pretty sure that 9-11 is super typhoons. Yeah, I'd say that's a generally good assumption. I don't know what you think about that, Danny.
It's solid. It's solid. I like it. It's not bad.
Yeah. I'd say most people are in general, in the 10 to 12, range in terms of hurricanes. And, maybe we might get like 8 to 10 major hurricanes, especially if we get 10 major hurricanes in the Pacific this year. That'll be something very interesting to track since 10 major hurricanes, doesn't really happen all the time. But I think it's possible this year. I mean, we had it happen in 2018 and in 2015, and I mean, especially with 2015, I'd say we are very similar into how our sea surface temperature anomaly configuration is right now, especially with that warm patch and how warm the sea surface temperatures in general are in the Eastern Pacific. But of course, we'll see, and we'll see whether or not it actually. We'll see if it pans out. But I guess there's nothing else to say beyond that. What about you, Danny? Nothing else?
Just to stay safe, everyone. Just keep the hurricane kit in check, and take everything seriously when you get the warnings and watches, because this season might be rough in the Eastern Pacific. It might be. That's all I'm gonna say. But you got to take the season seriously this year in particular.
Yeah.
Might be pretty bad.
Yeah. And of course, we'll be watching to see whether or not our first development might be happening as we get towards the end of the month. But with that being said, I think we're going to finish it off here for today's discussion, or, this week's live discussion. I'm going to post a, daily tropical weather update probably shortly after this to kind of wrap things up, or kind of, do it as a wrap of what we went over today. But, obviously this is still going to do a daily video. And then obviously we will continue to have these daily tropical weather update videos for you throughout the rest of the hurricane season. And we will see whether or not things end up being as active as we think it will be. I think it will. But of course, Mother Nature sometimes has other plans, so we will see. But with that being said, again, thank you all for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe. And again, if you like what you saw today, would really appreciate if you like this stream and subscribe to my channel, especially if you want more of these videos and you want to attend more of these live streams, which these live streams in particular will be happening on a weekly basis on Saturday. So if you really enjoyed today's stream and you want to see more of especially these kind of streams, stay tuned for next Saturday's stream, which I'll be doing. Definitely me, but if you want Danny as well, maybe he'll join too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you, Danny, for joining me.
For sure.
Right? It was a nice time. Definitely went over a lot. And of course, thank you to all of you out there for tuning in today. Once again, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll talk to you guys again very soon. See you.